and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make some handmade miniature trees. Why, you ask? Well, stick around to find out. The middle of last month, it was October, I was watching a lot of The Good Witch and decided I wanted to make a vision board. And of course, because I dream in 3D, I am a 3D artist, I cannot make a flat vision board. My dreams are in the middle of a forest, maybe cabin type of house, and to do that, I need to make some miniature trees to fill my forest. Now, I have gotten a lot of questions recently about miniatures, and I do use a lot of miniatures in my own personal artwork. I had a number of students asking me about the techniques I use to make miniature objects. So I thought it would be cool to go through the process of making some trees from scratch, as we do here, because we make everything from scratch here at Clay to Canopy. Some of my sculptural pieces I did purchase pre-made trees, and this is what I have taken apart a bit. But they look kind of like this. They come on these plastic structures that are all generic because they are made in a factory, these plastic forms, and they look chintzy and cheap to me. I don't really like these plastic forms. And you can see these are barren. I bought a bunch of these plastic trees and I took them apart and just used the foliage and remade a base. I used some polymer clay, sculpted my own form, used that as my base, and then pulled apart the foliage and used the foliage for the leafing on my trees. Now, the problem with this is you only get about 4 trees in a bag for about 13 bucks, and that's really expensive when you're gonna go and make a giant vision board that's full of a forest. So I wanted to come up with an affordable alternative to making those trees that might give you some ideas too if you are into miniatures and want to make up your own. One of the things I did notice as I picked apart these trees, this medium that it's made out of is foam-like. Not unlike these sponges that you can get at the craft store. And these are just cleanup sponges in the ceramic aisle. So I'm going to rip them apart and we're going to be adding some color to those. I also have a bit of upholstery foam. I believe they're polyester. They don't take to natural dyes. I'm going to be using an acrylic paint. So that's one method. Other thing I found, which I was really excited about, is moss. This is decorative floral moss. It is natural material, and because it is a natural material, it will take to a natural fiber dye. So I am going to be using some fabric dyes to dye some of this. The moss does come in various colors, so if you don't want to go through the process of dyeing, you can purchase it in different colors, but I was having a really hard time finding some of the shades that I wanted, very limited. All right, let's go get into this. First up, I'm going to paint the man-made foam. I think that the key for this process is to shred the foam a little bit into smaller pieces. The paint is going to sit on the outside of the surface, not absorb into it. Even though it is sponge, it's going to be a coating that floats on the top of the surface. Because this most likely made out of some sort of plastic, doesn't have open pores to do any absorption. With natural materials like the moss, can absorb and suck in things through its skin. A dye will work really well with that. That being said, whatever size you leave these in is the size it's going to be. Whereas the moss, I should be able to rip it apart afterwards and still have color running through it. I'll keep everything all one color, that way we can take a look at the different materials. This is a synthetic sponge, not unlike this one. It's a different type of materials. I'm going to play around with the different ones and see what they come out to be. And then I'm going to take a little bit of this upholstery foam and do the same. This upholstery foam you can find at the fabric store. I want to water down my acrylic. Just going to take some basic acrylic paint, just your regular old craft paint. If I dip it in, it's kind of transparent on the stick. Made an awful lot more than what I need. Alright, upholstery bits. So I'm going to get these in here, get them coated. This is my old sponge. We'll call this one my old sponge and that one my new sponge. It was the same package, but this is the newer one that I purchased, and this one, I don't think it was ever this yellow. It was just a different type of textured foam. So just so I know the difference between the two. You get this at Home Depot. It's faux sea sponge. So we're just going to write C on here. Laid down some parchment paper because this is, after all, a paint. I'm going to squeeze these out. I'm going to stick this board out in the sun and let them completely dry. I am going to take a stab at dyeing some of that moss. This whole package of moss cost me around $6 without a coupon. As I always say, never walk into a craft store without your coupon. I'm gonna mix up some dye into my batches of water. I'm using my ProChem dyes. I have a whole series of ProChem dyes that I keep on hand. If you do not have ProChem dyes, you can use the RIT dyes. However, the RIT dyes, they're just not as strong. You might have to let your pieces soak a little bit longer. When I order from ProChem, sometimes they have these sample colors and they come in kits, so you can get a whole starter kit and it'll be like autumn series. You just get a small amount, which is perfect when you're doing crafting, and it's fairly affordable. I keep hot and cool primary colors. Your yellow, red, and blue. I'll do one that has a little bit more of a warmer tone and one that has a little bit more of a cooler tone. I just keep those 6 main colors on hand because you can mix up these dyes just like paints. In those kits, I got burnt orange, tangerine, and something called clear orange. So we're gonna try those out. Have no idea what those are. Alrighty. I think I'm gonna pick a teaspoon of each and see what happens. And I don't want to mix my powders and get them contaminated, so what I'm going to do is dip this into the clean bucket. Even if a little bit of orange gets into that next bucket, no big deal. ProChem offers a lot of instructions for dyeing various things. I've been using them for years. Alright, so that's one of each of my mystery colors. And then I'm going to mix up my own orange. I love my turkey red. It is a deep, rich red and a very traditional red back in the Silk Road time. But this turkey red was coveted and sought after. And this is not that turkey red. Those were natural dyes. I'm going to go with my lemon yellow. In my experience, you usually want more yellow to red. But I think we're going to leave this 1-to-1. I'd like to have a darker rusty orange going on. I do have this bench covered with some plastic and I have gloves on. I should have longer chemical gloves on. Have no idea where they are. If you are doing this at home, find yourself some longer kitchen gloves. This will dye your clothes. It will dye anything natural. Probably should have said, as always, follow the safety rules then whatever product that you're using. So make sure you read up on these dyes if you are going to use them, or even the RIT dye. Follow all the safety precautions when working with these materials. I'm going to just divide my pieces into 2 so I have 2 bags. So the longer you leave these in, the deeper and richer the color. There will hit a point where the object that you're dyeing will no longer absorb any more dye. I am probably going to leave these in overnight. And I'm debating whether or not I want to put in the dye activator. I think I should, just for the heck of it. I'm going to go ahead and add in some salt. This is the same process I would if I was dyeing fabric. Then I'm going to wait a half an hour and add in some dye activator, which is the same thing as soda ash. If you're going with the RIT dye, it is not an additive that you need to have. I do notice that when I use these dyes, adding in those ingredients really enhances the color and really helps them absorb into whatever you're dyeing. Well, my moss is dying. I'm going to move on to making some of the bases of the trees. The scale I'm going with for my model is 10 feet for every inch. I'm going to vary my trees between 3 to 5 inches, which would give me a 30-foot to 50-foot tree. To start off, I am using some aluminum wire. I have in the past taken that plastic understructure, ripped apart all that foliage, and then skinned that plastic with the polymer clay and thrown it in the oven. What you need to do is set your oven to 185 degrees and then bake for a much longer period of time. The polymer clay is around 275 degrees-ish, depending on the kind that you have, for about 15 minutes. So if you reskin the original plastic, then lower your temperature and give it a good half an hour. After 20 minutes, you want to check it. If you end up seeing any kind of warpage, take it out of the oven, let it cool down a little bit, and then put it back in. The point of the baking is to really dry out the clay, so giving it a couple rounds will be sufficient. In my case, I'm going to be building from the ground up using this aluminum wire. I will be baking at 275 degrees at 15 minutes each one. I'm going to cut this first piece at 5. You know what? We're going to go with 6 because I want to have a little bit of extra for it to flare out and to make my branches. I'm going to go with 5 pieces for this first one. This wire is just picture hanging wire. You can find it in the hardware section next to where the anchors are. Alright, so I'm going to pick up my 5 pieces of wire and then I'm just going to give it a basic twist in center. Now I'm going to just bend some bits here at the bottom, flaring them out. These become your roots. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with my tops. I cut 6, ended up with 4, If you want it lower, go ahead and trim off your limbs. You can always bend these down a little bit more and have more of a weeping tree. Ooh, happy little trees. I said it. I said it. Happy little trees. Next thing you want to do is pick a color of polymer clay. I prefer to stick with one base color for the entire tree, then go in and acrylic paint multiple layers of different colors. Pick the color that you want for your base. Go over that with a dry brushing technique, and it leaves all of that main color within the cracks. So I got this open. We'll just go with this lighter color, and I'm just gonna soften it a bit. And my hands are blackened from working with the wire, but I don't care. It'll add an extra shade of color to my tree. And I'm just gonna come in and cover over my wire. I do want to make sure I completely encase my wire in this polymer clay because I do not want to see it once it's finished. You can add in extra limbs one of two ways. The first way would be to twist in some extra wire so you have a wire going out in different directions. If it's small enough, the polymer clay will hold onto itself. Sometimes what I like to do is just take a bit of extra clay and let that be the extra limb without the wire structure. In fact, you could even fire this up once and then go back and add a little bit more polymer clay in if you want to, if you have that kind of time. I never seem to have that kind of time, so some extra bits here and there. I haven't really done much of my shaping yet. I'll do my shaping when I start texturing. You can order a ceramic toolkit from Amazon, or you can pick one up from the craft store, and I will link the video to ceramic tools. I did a video on various ceramic tools. It's the basic overview of those different tools. For these trees, I tend to rely on my needle tool the most. Having a needle tool like this, you have a bit more of a handle. You can also get these little dental tools at the hardware store or at a craft store. If you are just having a go, trying things out to see if this is a process you want to even get into doing, use a toothpick. Toothpick would work. What I'm going to do here is take my needle tool, and I am going to begin raking across in like a, I guess, a hashing type of movement. I'm just coming in and scraping and texturing as I go. So this is the simplest texture to make, one of the textures you could make, and you can go ahead and adjust any way you'd like to. So this is a very fast way of doing it. Of course, you can come in and get very detailed. We'll play with my tools, decide what kind of personality my tree is going to have. Each one has its own personality going on for me. I'll just go to town trying to produce different types of textures. Another way would be just to stab little tiny holes. I'm going to show you a knot. I'm going to push down some clay, push, 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 and then up, all around. I love making knots in trees. It's like one of my favorite things to do. And then poke. Look, I have a little knot in a tree. I'm going to continue messing with this, and I could probably be here all day messing with one tree. If I don't like what I see, just squish it back out, start over. So for this next tree, I am going to go with a pine tree, and we are going to put in a stubby bottom. I've only got 3 pieces here. That top one is going to be the top of my tree, and then I'm going to start these 2 off as part of my side branches. I'm going to cut some smaller pieces. Get it twisted around. Once the clay goes on, these cross sections will stay for me. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep adding on cross sections like this. Do it flat for now. When I get the clay on, I can start messing with the shape. For this one, I want really thin amounts of clay on these limbs. I'm going to show you another technique to add a different type of texture. This structure is covered, and I'm going to take little bits of extra clay and roll tiny balls. And then I'm going to squish it on. And squish it on. What I would recommend is starting at the bottom and working your way up. Little bits of texture start to build, and then that'll be one set of bark texture. Now if you want to add a bit more interest to that, start this at the bottom on this side, smack that on, then take your needle tool, roll it in. Take another dot, roll it in a little ball, smack it on next to it, roll it in. This is going to begin to build a completely different texture on your piece. So that's going to take me some time. I'm going to get on smacking those on there and building up some texture. Also throw this one in the oven for 15 minutes at 275, and my other tree has made it on out. So that'll be ready to have the greenery put onto it. This method of tree is going to be part of my evergreen trees. I took a small piece of wire and rolled it in a little bit of clay. I have 5 bits of each size, and I just made a straight bark, placed some little holes. I'm going to just be gluing these bits with super glue. These have all been baked. Now that this has been pumped full of super glue, it cannot get baked again. But those little spikes will be a good place for my greenery. I have separated my trees into 2 camps, my evergreen and deciduous trees that will be all autumn colors. This is one of my evergreens, you know, it looks very much so like the structure of a Christmas tree, and I was just playing around with different ways of dealing with this type of structure. I really like this method. It is a little bit more involved because I do have to make all those little bits of spikes to get on there. This was my other go. For this spike, I would just glue on larger greenery at the bottom and then progressively get smaller. So this whole bit here will get completely covered in the greenery. I went ahead and finished up the texture on this guy, and these I still consider part of my evergreen series. I love this little, getting that little knot in. Just so hopefully you can see it. See my knot? A couple more of this style. So these are my evergreen. This is what I've got thus far. I have them in varying sizes. I did not make too many deciduous trees yet. This is the first one I did, and I'm still playing with different types. As I was walking around my neighborhood, I was just observing the different types of trees, and some of them don't even have bark or have a very smooth bark. I'm going to be doing a bunch more like this. It's as smooth as it could be with some little puncture holes. This one, I'm going to use the tip of my X-Acto knife to get this like triangular type of deal going on. I'm varying the colored clay. This one was a happy surprise. This one reminds me a little bit more of the trees around here in Southern California. A lot of the barks kind of peel away from the tree. You can fire up your piece, go in and add in clay on top of it and refire. And I ended up having to do this evergreen with the small circles several times because what started happening is as I was handling the base, trying to find a good place to grip, I kept messing up my texture. I did up to about here, baked it a bit so that I could handle the bottom while I continued on with the texture. It worked out really great with this one. So let's go ahead and repeat this one. This is 3 strands of my wire. The great thing about this technique is it does not have to be perfect on the first round. You're going to be coating it over, so you're kind of just getting it smacked into place and not worrying about texture and handling it. I was a bit hesitant of this method at first. I thought more time to stop and bake and then go back and work. But in the end, it's actually faster because it sets it, I can then handle it, add on the extra texture much faster without worrying about any damage I would have done to this part because it's really vulnerable right now. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the oven, 275, 15 minutes, and it's out of the oven. So the next thing I'm going to do is take a bit of extra clay, roll a little squiggle, place the squiggle on my tree, and taking my needle tool, I just added some texture. Sometimes you gotta get it really pressed on to get it to stick. When I go back in to bake it the second time, I reduce the time. I'm only setting these smaller add-on bits and it's not as thick as the trunk of the tree. So I reduced it to between 5 to 8 minutes depending on how much I put on there and how thick it was. I think these can get away with the 5 minutes and be good. This is basically it. I'm just gonna be smacking these little wormy little things on here. Ouch. Trying not to stab myself with the tools. Hot out of the oven, it is set and good to go. I have yet to pull out the moss that's in the dye. I'm going to do that in a minute, but what I want to do is start getting on some of the green moss onto the evergreens. We're just going to use some super glue for that. Pretty straightforward process. Add as much or as little as I like. This stuff is just insta-set. It kicks the super glue into setting really fast. All right. I'm really happy with that. Love seeing that tiny little knot in there. So I get so excited to apply the greenery to that first tree that I completely forgot to acrylic it to give it a little bit of dimension before applying the green. I'm okay with the color. I'm going to leave that as is. So I'm just going to squeeze these out. Should I rinse them? No, I don't think I'm gonna rinse these. I'm gonna squeegee these out and leave it on this plastic overnight to dry. As I was applying that green, dye was kind of getting all over my hand. So I have a feeling the dyed versions of this stuff, they didn't really like do too much rinsing, and it'll help leave the color. And since this is not a garment that's going to be worn and this stuff is not going to be washed over and over again, it's more than fine. So I'm going to have to be careful when I am gluing up. I'm going to save this vat here because there's one that is really yellow. So I'm going to throw it into this vat. I had this soaking for 2 days. I was not feeling well yesterday, so I just kind of left them out here. I checked on them to make sure that they weren't like falling apart or anything. Everything looked okay. All right, pull these out. I don't want them in here for too long. That did the job. Wow, that's crazy. This one is weird. I don't know how I feel about it. I think I might throw this in that yellow. Weird. I'm gonna throw it in the yellow. I'm leaving it in for a good half an hour. Then I'm gonna put it in that lighter orange for about 5 to 10 minutes. Alright y'all, I am behind the camera today because I am feeling mighty crappy. I just wanted to show you the results of the dyed pieces because now they are fully dried. Pretty happy with these colors. I like the way they came out, and I can now apply them to the deciduous trees that will make up my vision board. I also wanted to show you the results of the foam pieces. This is the upholstered one. The spongy stuff that I dyed with paint. They all work just fine. I could continue to pull bits of this apart and use them to glue on tiny bits. I can barely talk right now. I should probably just stop and just know well enough when to quit. But anyway, that was brand new packaged sponge. This is my old broken in sponge. And that's the one that is the faux sea sponge. It's basically going to be a sick day for me. So I am going to take these things inside. I will get some footage of me attaching these to the main parts of the trees that I have created, but I'm not going to talk too much because my throat's killing me, and yeah, I'm not feeling myself today. But I wanted to continue to move forward working on these pieces because these trees are going to just take forever. As usual, I take on massive projects that seem like they're going to be easy and they turn into some kind of big undertaking. So this was just that clay blob that I stuck stuff on. Yeah, watch my voice. This was the one that had that, you know, those little bits of prongs that came off. So this was a lot more effort in the clay making stage than this was. I don't know if I am convinced over whether or not the extra effort was worth it. It's still, they both have that tapered thing going on. So maybe if you know, you have to crank out at least 50 of them like I have to, maybe it's not worth the extra effort. If you're only making 1 or 2 and you want to have a unique piece, then maybe it is worth it. Left to be determined over which one I end up making multiples of. The dyed fibers are quite a bit drier than the ones that were already colored. I suspect because I let them dry out fully, but that's alright. I'm gonna roll with it. I think this one needs to be this color orange. Throw on some gloves because I'm tired of scrubbing my hands. Feeling quite the crappiness. But as we do, we plug on. Story of my life. Slow and steady wins the race today. Originally didn't start with these gloves because if the latex gets picked up by the glue, I'll have bits of latex stuck to the thing, but I don't know, see how it goes. May the odds be ever in your favor. Who is messaging me? I am so much happier with the look of this moss. I feel like it just seems so much more natural than the foam bits, even the kind that you buy. I don't know. Probably totally babbling because this is what happens when I'm sick. Disneyland calling. Want to know where the hell I've been. Too sick to move. Stuck to the gloves and not the damn tree. Alright. We're going to call this one. Can't be bothered with getting up. You are going to be a glorious red. I did a rundown of the cost. This pricing is completely for the large trees. So if you're making small trees, you're going to get more out of it than this. For the large tree, 16 cents for the wire, about 50 cents worth of clay, about 20 cents for the moss or the sponge, either or. You're looking at about 86 cents per tree. It does not include dye, so this is if you are going to get your moss already done up. If you're going to dye your moss, throw in another buck for a whole vat of the colored dye. Each tree is going to be well under $1. And again, this is me overshooting for a really large tree. Personally, even if it was the same cost, those other ones look cheesy and plastic. These guys here are going to be much more unique, and it's going to feel and look more like a live tree. In my opinion, I like them better. I think that they're more realistic. I think they're more unique. So there you have it. Well, I think I've hit my max for today. Good thing this is the last tree bark already made. Working in sickness. All right. Well, this is my autumn group. I will have to work on making some more bases and cranking out some more trees. But I think I'm going to call it here for the video. I look like crap, so I'm not going to do the closing on camera. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already. And stick around to watch more of my vision board come together.